everyone. Today we will be discussing about the exceptions which are being there in the concept. Okay, so let's check out with the exceptions. There are two types of exceptions. One is said to be a system exception, another one is application exception. Okay, system exception. Okay, whenever error is being there, at that time it is said to be rising an exception, which is said to be exception from the system. From the system you are said to be rising the exception. The exception may be either divide by zero exception, or it may be the out of memory exception, or it may be out of range exception, which is said to be a system exception. Okay, so this system exception, it is said to be either raised in the time when it is in the runtime, it can be raised. So it has its own syntax when it is said to be represented within the system. The syntax, you can say, it is of the format public class system exception colon exception. Means what? The base class which is there, it is your exception base class from which your mainly the system exception it will be rising. Okay, this is your system exception. Mainly it is said to be present in the base class library. Okay, this exception, it is said to be present in the base class library. You know about the base class library already, I have taught. It will be in the main class library or base class library, which will be accepting your details, it will be accepting your errors within the system, and it will be displaying in front of you when an exception is being raised through the system. Okay, it is related to the system which is being raised. Okay, the index may be out, the memory it may not occupy, it may be like you are doing something wrong. At that time the system may reply with an error message. Okay, so remember the syntax, it is public class system exception colon exception, and you have the various constructors which are there, which will be represented here. Okay, so let's check out with the application exception. Application exception is nothing but it's an error which is being raised by the user who is said to be executing the program. Okay, or executing the code. That person who is said to be executing the code, that person, he may be doing some mistakes within the programmatic concept. At that time an exception may be raised. That is said to be your application exception. Your application public class application exception is your syntax, and you have the construction. It is same as your system exception, but only the thing is that you use the term application exception here, but it also will be raised from the exception base class. Okay, this is the relationship how it will be present in the base class. You can check out with the base class how the exceptions are being generated. Here you have the system.object, then you have system.exception, then system.application exception, then which is said to be generated by the custom applications, whereas the system.system exception, it will be raised from the .NET base class library. Okay, this is the concept of your base class exceptions which are being there. Either it may be a system exception or it may be a application exception, though they belong to the main class, that is your system.object class. Okay, and in the system.exception class you have the concept of take one exception. Okay, so take one exception is nothing but your exception, it is said to be having only one parameter or a field or a method. Then it is said to be your system dot exception with the take one option. Take one, only one parameter, only one method. It is like that. That is said to be your take one exception, which belongs to your system dot exception. Okay, and it has the try catch block which is said to be used everywhere. Since you are using the concept of exception concept, you use the concept of try catch blocks. Okay, and here an example is being considered related to a car. Okay, when you consider it may be having a speed limit. When it is being crossed, it may give a speed limit. When it is being crossed, it will give a car is dead exception. Like that exception is being generated. Okay, so in this concept you can see the example. The example you can see here, you have a car which is in the dead state exception, and it belongs to the system dot exception. It has a string of message which is being considered, and a method class is dead exception. A default parameterized method will be considered, and a parameterized method is being considered. In that parameterized method, you are said to be using a message which is said to be printed. Okay, so when you override the message, okay, something happens at that time, a error message has to be printed on the screen through the help of the CLR. Okay, here any exception, when I give some string there at that time, or the variable I give there, if the speed is said to be more than that particular limit, then it should generate certain message. That message, it will be from the system.exception class. Okay, get this string, you are getting this string, and you are set to printing the message here. Okay, so you consider a car class. So your car may be consisting its name, everything, it will be there. But when you consider a method called as speed up method, it has a delta factor. Okay, delta factor which is being considered. Delta is the value which is being considered. So you have a try block, in that you have the speed to be calculated. The speed to be calculated, okay, it has a current speed whichever it is there, and a delta extra factor which is being considered. If this speed, actual speed, it is said to be greater, if speed is greater than max speed which is being considered, max I consider it like 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers. At that time, if it is said to be more than that particular kilometers, then it should write an exception. It should throw an exception. That exception, Ford icon. That exception it will print. And even in the catch block, if any error is there, if it is more, then it should write as an exception from where the exception has raised. For example, your method from which the exception has raised, that information it will be printed e.target site. And what is the message in that particular method? That message it will be printed on the screen. Okay, this is your take one method in the exception class. Okay, so I will end this session. Another two takes are there, take 2 and take 3, that I will be doing it tomorrow. Okay, thank you.